everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Rise and Glide podcast brought to you by Paddleboarding. My name is Maddie LeBlanc, and I'm joined here with my co-host Holly Pye. And today, we get to introduce the blind and dangerous, extreme, awesome Dean Dunbar. Oh my gosh, I was thinking of like 5 other adjectives too I could have added to that. Because this man that we got to talk to way back actually in December was probably one of the most fun conversations actually. And I think it's just because like his story is so inspiring in terms of like someone taking a situation of dealing with a challenge that is so I don't even know how to describe it. It's so immense, you know, like to be in his like late 20s and be officially diagnosed and legally blind, to living a life just full of adventure, full of awesomeness, and doing things that a lot of people who aren't blind don't even do as well. So I really enjoyed this conversation that we had with Dean. And I think, though, before we get into the episode, Holly, you just competed, though, in the Head of the Dart race this past weekend. And, I mean, winner, chicken dinner. Holly, please tell us about Head of the Dart and how that was, because I was watching from afar and I was cheering you on, and it was so much fun to see what was going on just from like Instagram stories and everything from yourself, from Paddleboarding. So how was your weekend? How was your race?
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, no, it was a really good weekend. So Paddleboarding sponsored the Head of the Dart Sup Challenge here in Devon in the UK. Usually it's supposed to run from it's like an A to B course, so from Totnes to Dartmouth, both in Devon. But it was super windy over the weekend and they changed the course, so we actually started and finished at the same place, which was a bit of a shame not to do the whole thing, but it made the day much less hassle, like logistically, so that was good. And it also meant, so the Paddleboarding tent was up at the event. It was nice and sunny, and yeah, it was super good to see everyone kind of hanging around and having a great day. Lots of questions about Paddleboarding, how to use the new paddle plan feature. People were buying t-shirts and all sorts, so that was super fun. And yeah, I'm really pleased to have won the women's division of the event. It was, yeah, like I say, it was tough in the wind, but there was like, I think over 200 paddlers on the water. Some of them are like us, experienced racers, but there was a lot of people who were also just doing it for fun. There was people in fancy dress and just all round great day. So yeah, I also don't know if they'll be listening, hopefully, but well done to everybody else, especially Marie and Emily, who came second and third. And in the men's, the winner was Will Keatley, followed by Hector Jessel, and then Joe Jones from Wales. So yeah, well done everybody else who also stepped on the podium, but definitely, you know, those guys that were out there for paddling for maybe, you know, on wider boards or shorter boards, and with less paddling experience, they were on the water in the wind for longer than we were, so I think the biggest well done to all of them.
How long were they out there for?
Well, I was paddling for an hour and 7 minutes, and I think the cutoff was like 2.5 hours. The course was like just under 10k, I think. So yeah, some of the people were on like dragon boards, so 4 people on one board. There was a few tandems, and yeah, some people were just chilling. They were just enjoying it as they went along. They had the music going. Yeah, we had some people dressed as aliens, some people dressed as prisoners. We had a Scottish crew out in their kilts that had flown down from Scotland. So yeah, it was a really good day, but some people were battling that wind for quite a long time, and it was hard work, so well done to them.
That's so cool. Okay, wait, hold on. Why do people dress up in costumes? Why is that a thing for the race? I had no idea.
So historically, Head of the Dart, I think, is one of the UK's biggest events, and there's always been like a massive leisure fleet. So people just, they're not racing at all. They just want to do the course. They want to paddle as part of an organised event with lots of other people, but they're really not interested in racing. And then there's the race fleet, but I think that the leisure fleet historically has always been the biggest. Like the biggest group of participants. And I'm not really sure where the fancy dress thing came from. But I guess one year some people just started dressing up and it's got bigger and bigger. The dragon boards definitely all seem to dress up. They have like a team name and they try and live up to it. And again, I don't think it came... I think one year maybe someone just thought it would be a good idea and it's expanded, and they actually gave a prize to the best dressed, which this year went to the alien dragons. They were called. So there was 4 of them on a dragon board, the like red equipment dragon.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask that.
Yeah, they were wearing like these green all-in-one suits, like with a hood and everything. They had like alien shaped sunglasses, like the eyes were kind of as if they were aliens, and they had these glittery skirts on, and yeah, these like sequins glittery skirts. They were pretty colourful,
that is so
and it also looked quite hot.
I'd love to see a picture of that, Dave, if we can like splice in somehow a photo of these costumes.
Let me see. Here is, okay, for anybody who is maybe watching, if we ever put this on YouTube, but if not, Maddie can see it and describe what she thinks.
Okay, I am literally seeing a man that looks like, you know when people like paint themselves blue to look like Smurfs or whatever? Kind of looks like that, but the guy's green.
He's got like a little bobble on the top of his head.
Yeah, there's a little antenna at the top of his head. Oh my god, the skirt is the best thing though. That looks so fun and glittery.
It's like silver foil. Yeah, loving it.
Oh my god. I had no idea. I actually only thought Head of the Dart was just kind of like, and maybe it's because I know of you and Emily and Marie like that do it, that are like competitive and it's like high quality racing. So I've always just kind of assumed that was the theme of the race. I didn't know people did it leisurely or dressed up in costumes. That's great.
It is good. It is great. But everyone's probably had enough of us talking about alien dragons. So we should get on to the real star of the show, who is, in fact, Dean Dunbar.
When Holly and I did our research, like we did our homework, we could not have been genuinely more impressed by this person's resume. And so, folks, we are so excited today to have Dean Dunbar from Scotland today on the Rise and Glide podcast. So, Dean, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Okay, so we are, seriously, as I already mentioned, we're so stoked to talk to you today because for those of you who don't know Dean, he is currently a registered blind, I would honestly say adventure enthusiast. You know, like I always want to describe people on this podcast as just like general paddlers, but Dean kind of does a little bit of anything and everything when it comes to being truly an adventure junkie. So, Dean, can you introduce yourself to our audience, who you are, maybe where you're from, and a little bit about yourself?
Hi. So yes, so my name is Dean Dunbar. I kind of give myself the tagline of the blind adventurer. I was born with full sight. Then at the age of 9, I lost sight overnight, was partially sighted for about the next 15 years. And then in my mid-20s, I lost a bit more sight. And at that point, I was registered blind. 2 years later, I did a tandem skydive, and that got me into adrenaline sports. And basically for the last 27 years, I've been doing extreme sports around the world. And in the last 10 or 15 years, been focusing more on my own adventures, going out, either on what used to be SUP for a while, and now I'm doing prone paddleboarding. So just doing that around the place and having fun.
That's so incredible. I remember reading on your website that when you were 9, you said you were sitting in a class, and that's when you kind of were like looking at a chalkboard, and you just were like, oh, okay, this, like, I can't see fully, or you remember squinting. Can you walk us through like that first experience of what it was like to start
Yeah,
kind of losing your sight?
sure thing. I, when I was at school, I was one of the naughty kids, so I sat at the back of the class so the teacher couldn't see what I was up to. And one day I was sat at the back of the classroom and I could see the teacher at the front writing on the blackboard, no problem at all. The next morning I went in, I could see her waving her hands around, but there was nothing on the blackboard. And I thought she was playing some sort of trick on us. I didn't know what was going on. So I spoke to my friend Gary, who I was sat next to, turned to him to ask him what was happening. But he was leaning over his jotter, writing stuff down. And I said, what are you writing down? And he said, what Mrs. Adamson's writing on the blackboard. And I looked and I said, well, there's nothing on the blackboard. And he said, there is, she's writing it down. And that was the first clue that there was something wrong with my eyesight. So it literally happened overnight. One day I could see and the next day I couldn't. So it was that quick.
Must
And
have
I
been.
suppose the story from there would be that, for the next 6 months or so, well, certainly for the next few weeks, I copied off Gary, not wanting to tell anyone, thinking I had lazy eyes or something. And after a few weeks, he had to grasp me up to the teacher and say, Dean's been copying for a while. We thought it was lazy eyes, but it's not. Where do we go from here? And it was off to the school nurse, then the family doctor, then to the hospitals, and lots of tests. And about 6 months after that, I was registered as being partially sighted.
Wow, that must have been quite scary initially when you didn't really know what was going on, I guess, especially as a kid when you're in a classroom full of other students and, everyone else can see what's on the blackboard and you can't. I can only imagine it must have been a bit strange. Were you like quite a naturally sporty person back then as well as a kid? And, before you started losing your sight, you've always been pretty sporty.
Yeah, I mean, since, as a kid, I did the normal thing boys did, climbing trees and running around and all that stuff. So I've always been, fairly outdoorsy. I've not been one that sort of like sits inside. I suppose part of that's my age. Go back to when I was a kid, we didn't really have computers and computer games. So, if you wanted to be entertained, you had to go outside. So, I've always been doing that. And, when my eyes went funny at school, to be honest, I don't think I was clever enough to worry about it. It was just like, "Oof, it's one of those things, no big deal, crack on." So it was just, as I got older, I then realised the barriers that got in my way. But at school, it didn't really matter too much. It sometimes meant I could get away with things. I didn't like doing, say, like woodwork, so I would just say, "Oh, my eyes are sore," and they'd say, "Oh, you can't do this lesson about your eyes are sore." I'm like, "Great, this is great." But, you know, roll on, bring it up, and I can look with this. So at school, sometimes it was actually a benefit. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Did you know you were going to that your sight would progressively get worse and you would lose it eventually or um
Initially, for the first 5 or 6 years, the doctors didn't actually know what was wrong with me. We did all the eye tests, and obviously they knew I had visual impairment, but all the normal ones, R&P and all these different, the standard visual impairments didn't fit what I had. One year I'd go for a checkup and they say, "Oh, yeah, it looks like you've got this one." Then the next year they'd say, "Oh, no, actually, it doesn't look like you've got that one. You've got this one." And it took 5 or 6 years, so they couldn't give me any definite prognosis because they didn't know what I had. And it was only when I was about 15, I think it was, they discovered that I have a very rare sight condition called rod and cone dystrophy. And basically, what that means is within our eyes, we have these cells called rods and cones. We have millions of these cells, and they help us deal with light, dark, and with colour. Unfortunately, my rods and cones are dying off, and once they die, they don't come back. So from that, they could tell me that as these rods and cones were dying, my sight would get worse, and potentially at one point I could go blind, but I could go blind tomorrow, or I could have this sight, the same sight for the next 40 years. There was no way of saying for definite, and my sight pretty much did stay the same until I was about 25, and then things started to go downhill again. And over the next 2 years, things got worse to the point that at one checkup, the doctor told me, "You're blind. The amount of sight you have left, what you have left will be gone by the end of the year. So get yourself a guide dog and start learning Braille." So that's kind of how it went. Yeah, that was a shocker.
yeah, it sounds I'm sure it was. What was that process like? Kind of then going through the process of getting a guide dog and learning Braille and kind of making adaptations at home to
Well,
help you.
certainly, I would say entertaining. It was very, very entertaining. Both of which I attempted. I was working at my old blind school at the time, so I spoke to my one of the Braille teachers there, And I said to her, you know, is there any chance you could give me some lessons on the side? So she taught me a few bits and pieces. And then we had the Easter school holidays coming up shortly after that. So I was living in Exeter at the time, down in Devon. I was at the blind school there, working as a PE assistant and working in the boarding house. And for the Easter holidays, I was planning to go back to Edinburgh to visit family. So I had a long train trip ahead of me, about 8 hours on the train. So I thought that'll be a great chance to practice some of my Braille. So I spoke to the teacher and she gave me a couple of books, and I sat on the train. And after a couple of hours, I thought I better start practicing. So I got the Braille book out and I rested it on the table in front of me. And I tried reading it, but it was a really awkward angle because it was so high and my elbows and arms were all bent funny. So I thought, no problem. I took the book and I popped it on my lap. And sure enough, that was a much easier position to read it from. So I'm sitting there with my hands in my lap, reading away with my fingers. What's that? Oh yeah, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, and laughing to myself when I got things right. Anyway, as I was doing this, I realised that people were walking up and down the train on the aisle next to me, and they were looking at me, giving me, I couldn't tell it was funny looks, but they were certainly staring at me. And I kind of wondered after a while, what's the big deal? Maybe they've not seen anyone reading Braille. No problem. I carried on for another 20 minutes, and then it dawned on me. People were walking up and down the aisle, and they were looking at me with my hands under the table, in my lap, sliding my hands around, laughing to myself. And it was at that point that penny dropped, and I thought, this isn't for me. So I quickly got the book up on the table, made sure everyone could see I was reading a Braille book. But for the next couple of train stops, I was expecting the police to come on and take me off for doing some sort of lewd act on the train. So that was my first and last go at Braille reading. So I decided that really wasn't for me. And, and the guide dog thing didn't go much better at that time either. I was living on a rather rough estate, and a guy came round to do the assessment, the guide dog assessment, and he came in and he filled out a questionnaire. I answered all the questions, and he then said, right, let's go for a walk around the local estate. I said, great. And he picked up a harness, and I said to him, I said, where's the dog? Is it in the car? And he said, oh, I don't have a dog for you. I said, well, how are we going to do this? He said, oh, I'll be your dog. You take one end of the harness, and I'll hold on to the other. And I thought this was a bit of a joke. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Anyway, we walked out my flat, got onto the street, and off we went. And I was like, seriously, there's no dog coming? He said, no, I'll be your dog. I was like, okay, right, this is fair enough. So I'm walking through this dodgy estate in Exeter. It was a beautiful sunny day, and you could hear people sat out in the gardens, sort of like having a drink and a smoke and doing whatever. And I could just tell they were looking, sat in the front gardens in the deck chairs, watching this guy with another guy in a harness walking up and down the street. So, starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable with this. At some point, he says, right then, he said, there's a bit of pork pie on the pavement in front of me. And as a guide dog, I would like to eat it. You have to tell me not to eat it. And I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah, yeah. He said, all you do is when I tell you I'm leaning forward to get the pork pie, you just say, hup, hup. So I'm like, okay, fair enough. She goes, I'm going for the pork pie now. So I very, very quietly went, whispered it. He went, no, it needs to be louder so I can hear it. And I'm looking around thinking, I know people are watching me. But okay. So hup, hup. He said, no, louder, more forcefully. And I think I said it 3 or 4 times to the point, and it was just getting louder and I was getting more embarrassed. And he said one more time, no, it needs to be louder than that. And I just turned around to him and I said, you can have the bloody pork pie if you want it. Just eat it. I don't care. Let's just get a move on. Anyway, we went up the road and all that was done. I got back to my house and I'm thinking, the locals are thinking there's some sort of couple of perverts walking around you, a man in a harness and all this stuff. I'm going to get a brick through the window tonight. Anyway, we get back to the flat. He's packing away his stuff. And I said, can you tell me anything about how the assessment's gone? And he says, well, you failed the assessment. I can tell you that. And I said, why have I failed the assessment? He said, well, from what you've been doing today, I can discover that you're no good with dogs. And I looked at him and I said, I've had dogs all of my life and I've had no problems with dogs. I'm just not very good with men in harnesses. And that's kind of how it finished in 1996. I was told I would be no good for a guide dog. So I went another 25 years until I actually went back and tried again whilst living up here in Scotland. And I told them, the story about the guy in the harness. And I said, I don't know what the rules are these days, but if you're going to do that to me, I'm not interested. And they said, no, we won't be doing that this time. And sure enough, I got an assessment and they said, oh, you're a natural with dogs. And I was 25 years ago as well. But that's no, so yeah, so that was that story. So that's how guide dogs and Braille went for me back in 1997 or 96. So
That is so funny. You know what? Honestly, I would be the exact same way. I'd be like, you can have the bloody pie. I'm not gonna yell at you on a harness, And oh man, that's That's funny. Oh my goodness. So you have a dog now, then I'm assuming? You do.
Yep, that's Molly the guide dog, and she's wonderful. She's a total life changer. So yeah, yeah.
That is so sweet. Oh, well that's incredible. We actually spoke with a Canadian athlete who competes in stand-up paddleboarding as well last season. Her name's Caroline Cook, and
Yes,
yeah,
I know her.
we had a great discussion about her and her guide dog Gracie. Love her dog.
I met her in Copenhagen. She's a lovely lady. Yeah, really liked her. Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness. Well, we're both really excited actually to talk to you about Copenhagen because we did see that I believe earlier this year you competed in a qualifying event to make it to the ISA, and then I think you had some challenges um being able to like register to compete for the ISAs in Copenhagen. Is that correct?
That's very, very true. Unfortunately, yes, that's very, very true. Yeah.
Would you like to walk us through that experience?
Certainly. So yeah, so I went to the nationals. I wasn't planning to go to the nationals in Scotland. It's just someone got in touch and said, "Oh, have you seen this?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's not really for me. I like racing, but not. I've not got any chance at winning, so it's not really an issue for me." And I was also going on holiday on the Saturday, and the race was on the Sunday, so it was kind of no, it's not going to happen. And then one of my friends said, "Well, just imagine if you did happen to win it, you could be the first blind person to compete at ISA at the Worlds." And I was like, "Oh, actually, that does sound quite good." So I spoke to my wife Rona, and I said to her, we were planning to go down to Devon on the Saturday. Would she mind putting it off a couple of days and we'll go down on the Sunday evening? And she was cool with that. So we went along, and I've got a very good friend and my main competitor, James Fletcher, who lives up here. He's an amazing paddler. On every race we paddle, I know I will be behind him. It just depends whether I'll be 1 minute or 10 minutes behind him, but I'm always behind him. He was competing at the Nationals, so I'd settled in with, oh, I'm getting second place. I can live with that. That's no big deal. And sadly, he took ill halfway around the course and had to pull out. So that meant I crossed the line first in the prone paddleboarding and I won the competition. I spoke to the organisers and said I felt quite bad about it because James should have won it, and on any other day he would have, and I was quite happy to default and give my position to him so he could go and represent Scotland, as he would do a much better job than I would. But they said, no, the rules are the rules. You're the first one across the line, therefore you're the one that has to represent Scotland. So obviously I was very happy to do that, but felt slightly guilty. But anyway, I thought, fine, let's go for it. I'd spoken to the organisers a couple of weeks beforehand, and we discussed the thing about being blind and would I be able to compete in Copenhagen. And they said, we don't know, but we'll find out for you. By the time I competed at the Nationals, they still hadn't heard anything back from ISA, and this was to be a trend to follow. That we contacted ISA on multiple occasions asking for help or advice, and they refused to respond. But they didn't refuse to respond, they just didn't respond. I don't know if they didn't get our half dozen emails or the messages I left on their answer machine or all the other contacts that we made with them. For some reason, they didn't respond. So for 7 weeks, I had a very tough time for 7 weeks. Sorry, slightly emotional, slightly angry, and slightly upsetting. But for 7 weeks, I had a very tough time where I didn't know if I was going to be able to compete. Like I said, we contacted them lots of times. They didn't come back. The rules stated that all competitors were not allowed electronic aids or devices or anything like that on their boards. But when I compete either with a sighted guide, someone paddling alongside me, or when I did the Nationals, I competed with a combination of a walkie-talkie and another hands-free communication device. My wife stood on the shore, Rona, she stood on the shore with a pair of binoculars, and she guided me through the course doing that. Now, some people thought that might have been an advantage over other paddlers, but it's not, because I'm having to slow down my paddling to be able to hear what she's saying. And we also discovered as well that when your guide's on the shore and looking out to sea, that there are different optical illusions, such as when I was paddling out towards the first buoy, I would be bobbing along, heading in the direction. She'd be telling me, go 11 o'clock, go to 1 o'clock, directing me in that way. And then she'd shout, go to 3 o'clock, which meant I was obviously at the buoy and I had to turn sharp. But I could tell that there were still paddlers ahead of me in the water, so I'm having to gauge. Rona's telling me to turn now, but I can hear splashes ahead of me. There's also waves and stuff splashing around, so I'm trying to distinguish, is that a wave I can hear ahead of me, or are those paddlers? So I'm having to stop, listen, use the little sight that I have to look around and work out, and I could see paddlers still going forward and other paddlers coming towards me. So I'm thinking, we're not at the turning buoy. I still have to go further. So I'm having to have a communication with Rona. She's shouting, turn right, turn 3 o'clock, turn 3 o'clock. I'm saying, no, I can't. She said, why? Because there's paddlers ahead of me. I'm going to. And I had to push on through with her shouting in my ear, 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock. So I've got all this going on until eventually I could work out where the turning buoy was. It was another 30 metres on. This happened throughout the first circuit. Every time Rona told me to turn when I was going away from shore, I would then have to stop and say to her, it's not here, it has to go forward. So I'm losing time every time I'm stopping to listen, stopping to communicate, paddling on. So I'm not getting an advantage over anyone else, but I'm getting an advantage on my normal state. You know, I'm getting told to go left, to go right, to keep going, which I wouldn't be able to do on my own. So there's the advantage I'm getting is my advantage. It's not an advantage over other paddlers. We tried to explain that to Isa, you know, that without someone telling me which direction to go, I probably don't have much of a hope of finding my way. But as I say, they wouldn't respond in any way. So after 7 weeks, I had to make the decision, was I going to go out to ISA and compete without any assistance? I've never done that in my life before in racing. I've always needed someone, and I had to make that decision after 7 weeks. Was I going to do it or was I not? And I made the decision that I was going to give it a go. There was the technical course, which is only, what was it, 3K or something small, and there was the longer distance, which ended up being 12K or something, 13K. Now, I'm normally a long distance paddler, but speaking to friends about the practicalities of it all, we realised that if I had to go at the long distance route, there was a very good chance that I could get lost. And at that time, we didn't know where the course was, whether it was on the Baltic Sea or whether it was inland on the canals. But either way, there was a good chance I could end up getting myself into a lot of difficulty. So, speaking to friends, we agreed that the safest option was for me to do the technical course. I would never be more than a few hundred metres from shore. There would be safety boats there, and if I did miss the course and head off out to sea, hopefully they would be able to come and rescue me. So that's kind of how I made the decision. Okay, I'm going to do this without a sighted guide, but I can only do the technical one because it's the safest option. A week before the race, we were given the course, a rough outline of the course. So good friends of mine, Alistair, Alison Martin and Angela, took me to one of their locks and they set up a course for me. And I basically went out and they paddled around it with me several times while I counted my strokes between each buoy. I had to work out, it was 90 strokes there, it's 80 strokes here, it's 25 here, it's 40. I had to memorise the lots of numbers that I needed for every circuit. There was going to be 3 of these. I then had to try and work out my angles. And basically that's what I did up until, you know, we arrived in Copenhagen. When I arrived in Copenhagen, I had these 7 numbers in my head. If I remember right, it was 8, 4, 9, 9, 11, 1, 12, and 6. All of those had a 0 on, and all of those were the number of right-hand strokes I had to count between each buoy. When I got to each of those buoys, I then also had to memorise, was it 20 degrees I had to turn? Was it 120? Was it 180? Was it 90? It was 70. All these degrees I had to turn on every turn. As soon as you get a degree slightly wrong, then you're off into the middle of nowhere. So I got these numbers in my head. I arrive at the course on the Monday. I go out on the Monday and discover that the course that they had created doesn't match up with the one I've been practicing. So I then have to relearn the numbers on Monday. So I spent Monday, I got 3 circuits done on that Monday afternoon, counting my strokes, counting my angles, etc. All was good. For the rest of the day, all I'm thinking is numbers, numbers, numbers in my head. Went to bed with those numbers in my head. Woke up Tuesday morning, numbers in my head. Arrived at the course, numbers in my head to do a practice route. And one of my friends, Alistair, came over and said, they've changed the course. So all those numbers I had in my head from Monday that had changed from the previous 2 weeks now had to be changed again. So I was then recounting my strokes on that. There was a bit of a mess up and I was pulled off the water early. So I didn't get to do the number of circuits I needed to memorise my strokes. Fortunately, that evening, I bumped into this amazing Netherlands paddler called Martin Ronde. He said to me, he said, you know, how are you getting on? What's happening? I explained the situation. I told him I was really flummoxed. You know, everything was beyond me. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I'd have to go back out Wednesday before the race and start again and try and work out my numbers. And he said, would you like me to come with you? Of course, I said yes. Wednesday morning, he was there. He took me out and took me around for 2 circuits in which he sorted my angles and I sorted my strokes. And thanks to him, I was then able to compete that afternoon. Without him doing his thing on the Wednesday morning, I don't know where I'd probably still be on the water now, to be honest. I had multiple mess ups where I got my angles wrong. The number of strokes was spot on, but I got my angles wrong slightly here and there and ended off going all over the place. And listening by sounds, I went to wrong points because I thought I could hear people on the beach. It turned out they were on a pier, and I set them at the angle where they should be, and I went off. And there was lots of mistakes made, but I got around the course. I came in second to last, which I was happy with. I got around the course, and I was over the moon to win the Scotland jumper. So that's how it went for me.
That sounds
An
amazing.
emotional roller coaster, shall we say?
Yeah, it sounds like quite the challenge. Obviously, you're used to, it looks like you're pretty used to doing challenges, but it seems totally different this one. There's more
Yeah,
than just one hurdle. And
yeah.
no, it sounds pretty incredible. And I'm sure you're very proud of yourself, and everyone at home and Team Scotland are proud of you as well,
Well, it
for
was a team
overcoming
effort.
everything.
I went out and paddled
Mm,
it, but it was down to my team that helped me with all these different things, helped me with my numbers, helped me with the angles, all these things. I did the course, but it was a team effort. You know, it was the team that crossed
yeah.
the line. It wasn't me.
I'm really interested to hear, obviously with like counting your strokes and memorizing the angles that you've got to turn. How does things like the wind affect that? Because I guess, well, for us on Maddie and I are both stand-up paddlers, and obviously I know the wind affects us a lot more because we've got more surface area exposed to the wind. But even lying down, even on a prone paddleboard, I guess there must be some element of if you have a headwind, it might take you more strokes than you expect to get to a certain buoy. And the same if you're getting pushed from one side to the other, then maybe your angle is going to be a bit different. How do you kind of navigate those challenges? And yeah, how do you kind of adjust your plan of action for waves or wind and stuff like that?
It's mostly down to guesswork. I know from myself in different conditions that 100 meters can be done in 60 strokes, but it can also be done in 82. And that is the range I have to work between, knowing that if someone says it's 100 meters, then it's that. So when I'm counting my strokes, like when I was doing the ISO one, the Copenhagen one, I knew as soon as the wind came in, I would have to add on extra strokes, but I couldn't tell how many. So you kind of know that from here to there is 100 strokes, but I know that I should be able to maybe see the marker buoy from, say, 85 to 90 strokes away from it. If I can't see it from there, then I've got to try and work out what I need to do. So when I see it, that if I then see it at 95 strokes, that then tells me that I'm probably not going to do 100 strokes, but maybe do 110, maybe 115 to get to it. So I definitely, the wind does affect me and the waves definitely affect me. And at the ISA thing, I've done all my practice training lying down on my belly. Now, the conditions were perfect for kneeling, and obviously, for prone paddling, that's the much more efficient and most powerful way to paddle. But I'd done all my counting lying down, and I know from lying down and kneeling, it is a massive difference. So when everyone else was getting up on their knees to power on through, I knew I couldn't do that because my strokes would no longer, the numbers I had in my head would no longer be valid. And I had to weigh that up with thinking, do I get on my knees and hope that I'm getting the numbers roughly right, or do I stay on my belly and hopefully get around the course? And that's how I had to make my decision for that one. Was I did everything lying down where it was perfect for kneeling. But the same thing happens with wind, that I know when I'm going out that it can be 60 strokes to cover this distance, or 82, or somewhere in between, and it does definitely complicate things. There's no doubt about it.
I think that is so fascinating how you use numbers to count and how you use them to navigate a course and figure out like where you are, and when you need to make a turn. And this year, actually, I competed in the ICF World Sup Championships in Sarasota. And I remember during a practice run, I was watching Shrimpy, so Shuri Araki from Japan. He was doing that as well. He was counting when he was practicing his beach runs, like how many steps do I need to take before I like run and jump off
Right.
the beach. And so I
Yeah.
think to me it's quite fascinating that, everybody can actually kind of use these different techniques. Whereas for you, it's kind of like you're like, well, I have to use this technique because this helps me navigate the course.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, do you use like visualization or any other techniques as well to help navigate, or is just kind of counting strokes um your biggest primary like focus when you're navigating a course?
Well, most of the time, to be honest, when I'm racing and that, I normally have a guide, so I'm purely counting strokes and listening for what they shout. Tell me to go to 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock. That's mostly what I do. So that was really the first. I did a race in Whitley Bay just before we came to Copenhagen, and that was the very, very first time I'd ever done a race without a sighted guide, and it was just for practice for Copenhagen. So to be honest, I've only done it on my own without a guide twice. It's not something I'd want to do again. If I could get away without doing it again, I'd much rather do it that way. It's much, much better or much easier for me without having to count strokes because your head is mince. When I crossed the finish line in Copenhagen, there was people talking to me and I couldn't tell you even now trying to remember who I spoke to, I couldn't tell you. Ideally, I wanted to go and sit in a dark place and just, my head was about to explode. My eyes had gone. Everything was more of a blur than normal. And it's such a strain. It's incredibly hard. And actually, to be honest, after doing only 3 kilometers, I realized there's no way I could have done 12 kilometers on my own without a guide because my head and my eyes would not have managed that. I would have just crumpled after, maybe 40 minutes or something. So there's a limit to all these things, unfortunately. And I'm getting older, and I'm not clever. I'm a bit thick, so it probably doesn't help.
It's okay. I'm 28 and I'm a bit thick too sometimes in there.
How about paddling like just day to day and when you were training for the ISA, but also just recreationally? Do you paddle with someone or do you have a guide then, or do you kind of know where you're going? In your regular paddling, how does that work?
It depends where I'm paddling. If I'm paddling on my local loch, then I'll be on the water on my own. But I use a device. It's a swimming device called Marlin, and it's a little bone conductor earpiece sort of type thing that just sits on the side of your head. And what I do is I set it to tell me every 100 meter. Oh no, it's every meter. Sorry, every minute. Beg your pardon. So I know that I want to aim for about 123 meters per minute. So I will plow on, and that gives me my pace. When I'm on my local loch Clooney, I kind of know where most things are. If there are people in the water, a lot of the local swimmers, paddlers know me now, and they know just to shout at me to get out the way. There's a big island in the middle, and normally I see that before I hit it. But if I go into water that I don't know so well, then it's normally with a guide. I mean, I have done some big paddles when I used to do stand-up paddleboarding. I did Loch Awe, which is the longest freshwater loch or lake in the UK, and I was the first person to paddle that on a sup, and I did that totally on my own in the middle of a storm. And that was pretty cool, but I got lost multiple times with that. I had to gauge roughly where I thought I was. I've been on the water for 40 minutes. I'm thinking 40 minutes, I should be at this point. I've been on the water for 2 hours, I should be at this. And hopefully I'm looking around for clues in the landscape. But my clues in the landscape, people are maybe, when you're paddling Loch Ness, people will look for Arkett Castle, or they'll look for the Doors Inn pub, or they'll look for, I don't know what else. I think there's bridges that they can see. For me, I'm just looking at the hills. I'm looking for lumps, anything big, and I'll look up and I'll see a hill and I think, that should be on my right shoulder. It's still ahead of me. I've still got distance to go ahead of me. Now it's on my right shoulder. God, now what do I start looking for? There's got to be something ahead of me to look for now. And sometimes the great thing in Scotland with paddling on lochs, if you're doing an end to end, normally at the end of the loch, you'll have two hills at the end which will come down and meet, and they create a V shape, and that V shape is my sweet spot. So if I'm paddling up a loch, I'm just looking at that V spot, and that's where I'm aiming for. If I hit the beach before I get to the V spot, then so be it. But I just know that's where I'm aiming for, and I'm constantly listening for clues and looking for anything that could possibly be on the water to help me. Sometimes I'll paddle past someone and I'll shout, "Where am I?" And I'd hope they'll be able to tell me, "Oh, you're 2 miles from the end of the loch, or 100 yards from it, or whatever." So when I'm paddling on my own, I do stuff like that. But a lot of the time it is with friends and other paddlers.
That's incredible. Can you actually explain to our listeners, like, I thought it was quite fascinating last night when I was looking on your website, you actually had a sample photo of your current site and like what you can see, especially like if you're just standing still. Because I think most people are listening to this and they're like, "Oh, wait, he's blind, but what can he see?" So, can you kind of actually walk us through like the partial sight that you do have and how that helps you on the water?
Yep, sure thing. So yeah, I do definitely still have some sight, but my sight's at such a level that the doctors say it's not useful. So therefore, that's why I'm registered blind. But when I'm out on the water, when I'm paddling, I tend to see sort of basically three layers around me. So if I'm sitting or lying on my board, I'll look out and I'll see a white layer, a dark layer, and then hopefully a lighter layer above it. And what I'm seeing is I'm seeing the water, the landscape, and then the sky. I can't see anything defined on any of those things. I can't see, I don't know what you get on the water. If there's something like a boat, a paddler on the water, if there's someone in a canoe or something like that, I won't see them until they're probably within arm's reach. I may hear them before that, but I'm unlikely to see them. On the land, on the dark mass that I'm seeing, the second layer, it's the hills that I'm seeing. I'm not seeing, as I said earlier, castles or cars driving along or people sat on the beaches or whatever else people see when they're out paddling. And the layer above that is the sky. So I basically have three layers that I'm paddling through. If I'm walking down the street, I only see things that move. So if someone's walking towards me, I will possibly see them just before I walk into them. But if they stand still to let me past, I will most likely walk into them. I have multiple blind spots in the middle of my eyes. These blind spots vary in size, and I can lose anything from a cat that crosses my path. I'll see it kind of appear and disappear as it, playing. Now I see it, now I don't, as it walks across in front of me. But when I'm crossing the road, I can lose a double-decker bus in one of these blind spots. And on several occasions, I've looked to my right, nothing coming. I've stepped out and I've heard the screeching of brakes, and there's an articulated lorry 3 meters away from me. And that was sat in my blind spot when I looked, and I didn't see it. My eyes fill in the gaps as well. So if I'm looking up the road and I think there's nothing there, I'll tell myself, oh, there's nothing there, and all of a sudden I will see a clear road that's there. It's not a clear road, but I've told myself I can see it, and my brain fills in the gap, and I now see a clear road. A classic one with my wife Rona was when we're out driving. Sometimes you're stuck in traffic, sat in a traffic jam, and I'm looking around, and I'll look to my left out the window, and I'll see the green grass of the grass verge next to me, and I'll see blue and yellow, and I'll look down and see blue and yellow. Oh, it's blue and yellow flowers, and as I look at them, I can see the petals of the yellow flowers. I can almost see the stems. I can see them blowing gently in the breeze. Beautiful blue, beautiful yellow, and that's really lovely. And I say to Rona, "I've seen the flower display down here. It's really nice." And Rona will lean over and say, "What flower display?" I'll say, "The blue and yellow." And she'll laugh and I'll say, "What is it?" She'll tell me it's pipes by the side of the road that are being used in the roadworks that we're sitting in the traffic jam. But my brain has filled in the gaps to see the flowers and moving and the petals, and that's how my brain works. It fills in the gaps, and I don't, I don't trust it more, So,
It's
so
a
yeah,
beautiful way to look at life, though. I love your
yeah,
perspective. Like, that's so positive.
it can be definitely. I try to use it to the best, So yeah.
It's also just pretty incredible that the brain can fill in the gaps like that. I know it's not always, it sounds like it's not always accurate, but I'm sure sometimes it is accurate. And it's, it's a pretty special thing that our clever brains can do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so how did you first get into paddling, and when did you first get into paddling? It sounds like you did some stand-up paddling before the prone paddling, or was it the other way around? Tell us a bit more about how you got into paddling and why you decided to continue.
Right. So, as I said, from 1998, I did the tandem skydive, and then I got into, I got the adrenaline rush from that, and I was like, God, what do I do next? And I got into bungee jumping and whitewater rafting and kayaking, all sorts of things like that. And around about 2008, 2009, I started setting myself, a challenge for the year, mountain bike this, climb that, do these different things. And in 2012, I was down in Devon, and I've got a very good friend, Carl Sawyer. He's, we've been buddies for 30 years now, I think. And he'd been doing SUP for a while. And every time we went down to Devon, he'd say, "Oh, come on out in the SUP, give it a go." And always I'd stand up on the board, and I'd end up spending more time swimming than paddling. I'd be falling off in the waves. So in 2012, he got me on the board, and I didn't think much of this stand-up paddleboarding. 2013, I was down again visiting him, and again he got me out on the board, and again I spent more time swimming. So I thought, SUP's really not for me. At the end of 2013, he said, "What have you got planned for next year?" And I had this thing planned for the beginning of 2014, a tandem speed ride. I said, "But after that, I've got nothing really planned." And he said, "Why not do some SUP?" And I was like, "I've tried it. It's no good for me. It's not for." He said, "No, no." He said, "I'll teach you." He said, "You'll get good at it. You'll love it. You'll love it." I said, "Okay, well, I'll give it another go." And he said, "Instead of just giving it another go, why don't we get together and we'll paddle the Cali Canal from Fort William to Inverness, 92 kilometres. Let's paddle that over 3 days." I was like, "Oh, well, okay, let's give it a go." So in the April, I bought a board, and sure enough, I trained up for it. And in the October that year, along with his brother Jason, the three of us spent 3 days paddling the Cali Canal. And that's kind of what got me into stand-up paddleboarding. So I blame it all on Carl Sawyer. It's his fault. And over the next 4 or 5 years, I had a wonderful time stand-up paddleboarding, doing all sorts of daft things. The next year, again, with Carl and his brother and a couple other friends, we paddled from the Scilly Isles to Cornwall. It's about 50k across the sea, and that was great fun. And I'd set myself a few wee goals to do things, and I paddled with different friends. We paddled the three lakes, paddling the longest loch in Scotland, the longest lake in England and Wales. We did that in 20 hours or something non-stop. We did the Magnificent Seven, paddling the seven longest freshwater lochs in 7 consecutive days. We did all sorts of fun things, and one of my favourite ones was I'd read a book. My dad had given me a book in 1992 all about this island called St Kilda, or a group of islands off the coast of Scotland. And I read it and I fell in love with the place. And I thought one day I want to get out there. And 2009, I've got a very good friend who I do some kayaking with. And we thought, oh, we'll paddle out there. And he paddled out multiple times. So it was a safe option to do this, paddle 70 kilometres out into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to see these islands. But the weather was against us and we didn't get to do it. And then I got into SUP and I was loving that. And then it dawned on me, I thought, I wonder if I could get to St Kilda on a SUP. So I phoned up Patrick and I said, I've got this crazy idea. What do you reckon? He's like, well, if you want to do it, let's do it. And in 2017 we did. And I became the first, and I think still the only person to paddle out to St Kilda on a stand-up paddleboard. So it was all going well, and I was doing different things and having great fun. And in 2017, I attempted to do the 11th city non-stop with a sighted guide, and it was Jo Hamilton Vale. She was my sighted guide. She was absolutely fantastic. But at 90 kilometres, my eyes just packed in on me, and I literally couldn't see anything. I just had this kind of snowflake effect on my eyes where my eyes filled. I can visualize it still now. It's like someone was dropping coins or CDs into my eyes, and they were just layering up until they completely filled over my eyes, and I couldn't see a single thing, not at all, no light, no dark. And we're on the water at this point, and I got into panic. And Jo said, "Right, I'm getting you to the shore," and she guided me to the shore on my board. And the next thing, I had hands grabbing me, yanking me off my board, throwing me onto the shore. Didn't know what was going on. It just so happened it was my wife Rona was there with another person who I hadn't met at that point, Andrew Smith. They just happened to be spectating, just roughly where my eyes went funny, and they pulled me off the board and handled me, got me into safety, and sorted me out. And that's what happened in 2017. In 2018, I decided I'm going to go back. My sight had come back. The little bit of sight I had came back after about 3 or 4 days. So I thought, yeah, I'm coming back next year. But I now know that my eyes can't take that duration. I think I'd been on the board for 11 hours and my eyes packed up. So I now know my eyes can't do 11 hours. So how am I going to do 200 odd kilometres, on a stand-up paddleboard? How about a dragon board? So I got in touch with John Hibbard at Red Paddle, and he's been a great guy. He's been a great support to me throughout my SUP days. And he said, I can lend you a dragon board and you can train for a few months on it and, yeah, take it off to Holland and go for the 11th city. So that was the plan. Unfortunately, 40k into the 11th city, my right foot imploded on me, and I've not been able to stand up paddleboard since then, since 2018. So I was looking for a new sport, and I'd seen prone paddleboarding at the 11th city, and I had a friend who had an inflatable one, so I bought that off him and went out. And in 2019, since then, that's become my sport, and absolutely love prone paddleboarding. That's how I got from SUP to prone.
That's
Wow.
fascinating. I was so curious to know. Do you primarily ride bark boards when you prone, or do you just kind of hop on whatever you have available?
I have a bark board and I use that for my racing, and I have a Vanquish board that I use for the sea work. It's much more stable for the sea, and so that's what I use on the sea. But if I'm training for a race or I'm wanting to do something fast, then it's definitely the bark. But it's a wobbly so and so. So I'm not that great at kneeling. I've had a lower back issue for many years. So proning, my first 2 or 3 years of proning has been all lying down, and it's only since I got into the racing scene that when I'm paddling against everyone else and we're all lying down, I can hold my own. As soon as they get up on their knees, then I'm left behind in their wake. So the last 2 years, I've been trying to work on my lower back with a physio, trying to strengthen that, and now I'm able to kneel and get up and do a little bit better than I could before. So yeah.
It's pretty incredible. How do you find the balance? Like especially when you're up on your knees, how is the balance when you obviously don't have your sight? I guess you adapt to it, or do you find it quite wobbly?
When I was doing SUP, people used to question how I could possibly be blind without seeing a horizon. I'd keep my balance. It seemed to be natural there, but on the bark, my balance is still pretty rubbish. The
So
slightest
so
wind hits me
standing
and
up.
I'm wobbling. But the thing is, I don't see the waves. That's the problem. Is I'll be paddling on a flat bit of
Yeah.
water and awake from a board, and everyone else will see it. So I don't know what they do. They stabilize themselves or they lie down or what they do. But for me, I'm paddling along, and then all of a sudden the board rolls and I fall in the water. Like, there must have been a wave there. So yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Like the stability on a prone board. Like I don't get on one often, but when I do, that definitely, like the texture of the water determines for me the same thing, like whether or not I'm going to stay on my stomach or whether or not I'm actually going to knee paddleboard. And like the rails are just so round on a prone, like naturally, right? So I could see that so often, yeah, that if you just can't see what's coming, it's hard to brace for it.
Yeah, exactly. There's no warning and it hits you and you've just got to react instantly. And like I said, I'm 55-year-old. I'm not very clever. My reactions aren't that great. So I swim a lot.
I
So,
saw that you'd done some, on the subject of swimming though, a different kind of swimming. I see you've done some pretty incredible swims as well. You've swam the English Channel, is that right?
I didn't. I trained for that. I trained for the English Channel. I spent about 20 months training for that, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to do it. I couldn't. For myself, I'm quite a skinny guy, and the cold water is a bit of an issue. So I wanted to try and gain weight while I was doing it, and I was eating loads. I was doing all the right things to gain weight, but then I was out training, 7 or 8 miles a day swimming. On the water for 3 or 4 hours, and basically, at tea time when I went to bed, I'd roll into bed because I was this big rotund guy. By the time I'd finished training, I was back to being skinny again. So I couldn't put the weight on. And although I was pushing myself through with the cold water, I did actually get hypothermia on a couple of occasions during training and decided that it probably wasn't clever of me to go ahead and go with that. But I had great fun trying and I got into open water swimming in a big way. And I did things like the Corrie Wrecking Gulf, the whirlpools there, and did all sorts of great fun stuff. And I still swim. I do the Lamlash Splash every year on the Isle of Arran, and that's a wonderful swim. It's just, I think it's a mile and a half or something like that, and you swim from Holy Isle. They take you out on the ferry out to Holy Isle. They drop you off there, and then you swim back to Arran, to Lamlash, and it's great fun. It's a fun event, and it's yeah. For me, the choppier the better because I don't get flat water swimming because I don't see anything, so it's quite boring. So when the waves come out, it's like, oh great, I can feel something, and I thoroughly enjoy that. So, the bigger the lump, the
Wow.
better.
Yeah,
Hmm.
no, even just training for the English Channel swim is a lot more than 99% of us. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
On the subject of swimming though, because obviously being a strong swimmer is one great way to stay safe whilst paddling. If anything does happen and you feel confident swimming back to shore, then that's one bonus. And there's quite a lot in the news and at the moment with staying safe whilst paddling, both stand-up paddling and prone paddling and kayaking, all sorts of paddle sports. What are your kind of go-to top tips for staying safe on the water? I guess if you have a guide, then obviously you have somebody nearby. But if you don't have a guide, or what other ways do you tend to try and stay safe whilst you're out paddling?
A lot of the time I'm training on water that I know, so I will kind of go out a lot of the time just with a leash without a buoyancy aid. If it's on inland water, I won't touch the sea without a buoyancy aid. It's just not worth it. A leash and a buoyancy aid when I'm on the water, but I also won't go out without a sighted guide on the sea. I just I once paddled when we first got into stand-up paddleboarding. My wife and I, we just had the one board between us, and we were up in Aberdeenshire somewhere, and we took the board down and we were taking turns, and I went out first. And before I went out, Rona had said, "Oh," she says, "can you see the oil rigs out in the distance there?" And I was like, "No, no, they're too far away." And I'm looking and I couldn't see them. And she said, "Oh, fair enough." She said, "There's oil rigs out there and there's a tanker and there's this and there's that." Anyway, I couldn't see it. So I went out and I paddled on my own and I kept within about 100 meters of the shore and I was paddling nicely, doing okay. And then I looked over and I realized I could see the oil rigs. And I thought, hang on, if I can see the oil rigs, I'm probably more than 100 meters off the shore. I turned around and aimed for the shore, and it took me almost 15 minutes to get back to the shore. I had gone that far out without knowing it, and that put the willies up me. It really scared me. It freaked me out that I could, something so straightforward could happen to me. So basically, my rule is when I go in the sea, I don't do it solo. It's just daft for me with my eyesight to go out in the sea on my own. You're just asking for trouble, And I'm not, I say I'm not, I say I'm not that clever, but I'm clever enough to know that one, And but like I say, inland water, if it's water that I know, which is mostly where I paddle, then I know that if I come off the board and my leash comes off or whatever, I'll still either find the board or I'll be able to swim to shore. I can comfortably swim 2 or 3 miles. That's not a big deal.
Hmm. You talk a lot about your wife, Rona, and I'm so curious, how has she helped you along this whole journey of being a guide and helping you pursue your passions that you love and your adventurous lifestyle?
Well, Rona is a massive part of all of these things that I do. Without Rona, I wouldn't be able to do, well, 80% of what I do. I'm pretty sure she's a massive support. She's with me all the time. You know, she knows her limits as well. You know, we wouldn't go on the sea together because she knows that you know, she's not that confident on it there. But there's other aspects, other places that she's more confident, and she will guide me. So if we're on the loch, she's happy to guide me. I do a bit of mountain biking, and she'll be my guide for that. You know, she'll guide me around the trees and you know, off gullies and stuff like that. So we do technical stuff there. You know, she is a massive part of it. Even if she's not my guide on something, she'll be the person that gets me to the venue that I need to be at to do it. But yeah, she's a massive part, and like I said, I couldn't do most of it without her. You know, love her to bits.
That's amazing.
Oh,
Yeah. Did she come with you to Copenhagen?
Yep, she was there with me. She was, yep, yeah, she was there to hold my hand. Yeah, yeah, she had to do that many times, but yes, she was definitely there. Her and Molly were my guides when I wasn't on the water, so I had Molly the guide dog with me. So yeah, so yeah.
That's
how did
amazing.
you
What a champ.
find um yeah, how did you find the whole event, the like event experience as a whole? Obviously, it sounds like the run up to going to Copenhagen was pretty stressful. But once you were there, aside from the competition and the technical race, how did you find the whole experience?
I absolutely loved it. It was just amazing. Absolutely, and the people there, the competitors, the organisers, the people that I met there. I'd kind of gone there with a bit of a chip on my shoulder about ISA with all the situation that had gone on, but all the officials that I met there were nothing but perfect, or they were just fantastic. Uh, you know, so they were great. The other paddlers, I got a wee bit of a buzz just before the race. I thought from the way the rules had stated that I wasn't allowed any assistance on the water, but I was then told that actually the other paddlers can help you. It's just you're not allowed assistance from officials on the water or people on the shore. But before I'd been told that, my concern was I was worried when I'd done one of my practice runs, I'd actually hit someone because they'd been in my blind spot. I hadn't seen them and I ploughed straight into them. So normally when I race, people know when I'm on the water, if I'm getting in their way, they just shout, "Oi, Dino, get out the way," and I'll do what I'm told. It's not a problem, and I don't have an issue with that. But I was worried that if any of the paddlers shouted that they might be disqualified or penalised for trying to help me. Fortunately, Anthony Vela told me that that wasn't the case. But, you know, I'd spoken to a few of them beforehand and said, you know, if I do get in your way, just shout, "Get out my way," sort of like that. It's not a problem. But don't help me because I don't want you getting disqualified. And several of them before the race came up to me and said, "If we can help you, we will." They weren't going to tell me that, but they were definitely going to tell me if I was off course or anything like that. And that was really powerful to hear from my competitors. I mean, obviously, I wasn't any threat to any of them. I knew I was going to be way behind them. But for them to say, you know, if we see you're going the wrong way and we can help you, we'll shout. And that was pretty special, to be honest. And everyone that I met out there, paddlers, officials, were top people. And yeah, it was thoroughly enjoyed it. And although I know I won't get another chance to do it because as soon as James comes back on the scene, I'm back. I'm back in the back seat. I'd love to do it again because the actual atmosphere there was amazing. It was fantastic to be part of that.
That's
Yeah,
so
that sounds
incredible. I think your
incredible.
story, it's so inspiring, and like I think it sets a precedent actually as well for not just the ISA, probably also the ICF. Because I think listening to athletes like yourself, athletes like Caroline, there's definitely different obstacles to overcome when participating in a world championship, and I know the ISA has like an adaptive like surfing event every year, like they have their world championships for that, but it goes to show that, stand up still we have some ways to go, and prone as well when it comes to our world championships. So hearing your
Yeah.
story, I think is very important too. It teaches us a lot in ways that we can get better as participants, as event organizers, and for making the sport fair for all to participate. And so I just love, though, hearing like your attitude and your enthusiasm towards all of it to me is so astounding. And so I'm just so curious, from the time that you were diagnosed to now, how did you develop this perspective on your life to say that, okay, I'm going to choose to take action and still participate in fun things instead of like going to that maybe almost like darker side of like wanting to give up or just saying, oh, that's hard, so maybe I won't go out and do it?
Yeah, I don't know. There is really there's only two options: sit down and cry, or get up and get on. And I've always been just get up and get on. You know, it's just there's always going to be barriers. I'm getting barriers because of my eyesight, but other people get barriers because of other issues. You know, not necessarily disabilities. You know, you're too short for this, you're too tall for that, you're too big, you know, there's always going to be barriers to different people, and it's just how you deal with them. And for me, it's just, you know, I've got to get on. I haven't for a while, well, up until this year. I used to probably once a year, no particular date or anything like that, but something would happen to me. Maybe, you know, I'd go to do something and they'd say, oh, you can't do it because you're blind. And I'd then go to those dark places for a day or two and have a hard time in there. But Rona, my wife, was there for me. She'd help me through it, and I'd come out and everything was great. And I used to get that, like I say, probably almost every year, and I had that for quite a few years. And then I probably had a gap. I've not had that for probably 5 or 10 years until this year with the ISA situation. I'd been pretty clear of all that, and everything was very positive. But it was thanks to Rona and to other friends who kind of helped me get through that. But yes, you do get these dark places, but it's a case of trying to get through them and come out. And there's barriers, and hopefully, you know, people like ISA will be able to look and see, you know, I wasn't looking for any advantage over any other paddler. I just wanted to level things up a little bit. As I think it was Sarah from Sup Junkie said, he doesn't want an advantage. He just wants a level playing field. You know,
Mhm.
so that's all I'm after. I just want a fighting chance. I think that's what Sarah said. I want a fighting chance. You know, and that's all I'm after. But yeah, the attitude it is what it is. You know, you do or you don't, and I do. You know.
Yeah, if there's any race directors listening to this, which I'm sure there are because we've spoken to a few of them, or otherwise, if you did this same event again next year, is there anything you'd like the event organisers to do differently? If well, just to make, I guess, the events and the races more accessible to any other people who may also be partially sighted or be also completely registered blind, or just to help make things a little bit easier, and yeah, level the playing field. um
I think communication's the main thing. I think if they're open for a chat, we can then discuss things and say, you know, this is what I would, in an ideal world, this is what I would like. This is what you've got. Is there somewhere in the middle that we can meet? You know, is there something that we can possibly do that no one else is going to think that, you know, you're getting an advantage over someone else? I totally understand that the last thing you want to be doing is giving, you know, people an advantage, or, you know, people who, well, giving me an advantage over other people. I totally understand they don't want to do that, and I have no problems with that. But leveling up is just something that we need. But you can't do that if they don't talk to you. And like I say, I phoned and left several messages on their answer machine. Emails were sent. They didn't communicate. And I think that's what needs to be done. And in the UK, I mean, I've paddled multiple races with GB SUP, Glasgow Paddleboarders. I've done all these ones. Speak to them beforehand. I mean, they all know me now, so it's no big deal. But when I first contacted them and would say, you know, like Lock SUP and all these other people, I'd get in touch and say, you know, I'd like to come along and do the race, but I'm blind. I'd like a guide paddler or possibly, you know, someone from the shore. How's that? And every one of them would say, yeah, what's the problem? No big deal. Yeah, of course you can. No one has ever said, no, this is the first time I've had a no, was ISA, and it was a big one. You know, it was so. Like I say, I think the first thing they have to do is be open to communication. And once people start to talk, we can then start to sort things out. Where, you know, is it possible that we can meet? Could they maybe given me the course maybe a week earlier than everyone else, so I can go to my local lock, set it up, and start counting my strokes then, rather than counting the strokes the day before the race or the morning of the race. You know, things like that. I don't think that's an advantage over people who are stood on the start line. You know, there's 18 of us on the start line, and 17 of those people on the start line could see every turn of that course before they went across the red line. All I could see was the red line. I couldn't even see the water. I knew I had 3 or 4 or 5 steps until I got to the water. Everyone else was like, I'm going to there, I'm going to there, I'm going. They could see the whole. You know, that's how much the gap was between me and the other paddlers. You know, all I'm asking is, can we make that gap a little bit narrower? And the only way we can do that is to talk.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess that makes total sense, and just communication isn't too difficult. Yeah, I guess things like making sure if there was a way that we could standardize race courses, and you know, if every technical race, I think maybe there was a discussion about this online somewhere a few months ago, but you know, if every technical race was always the same shape, or something like that, then you would be able to learn it. A bit like in athletics, you know, they always run around a circular track, or you know, there are some events where the competition is always exactly the same. I don't know if that would take some of the fun out of stand-up paddling and
I
pro
think it
paddling.
would. I think, you know, it'd be an advantage to me, but I think it would be boring
Mm.
as heck for lots of people. I'm in the minority. I'm in the minority. I can't say the word. I'm just a wee part of it, and I don't want. I don't have to change for me. I don't want that. You know, like I said, I think, you know, if everyone knows, oh, we're going to the course, we're going to do 100 meters that way, I think it will take the fun out of it. I think people turn up going, oh God, have you seen the course? I've got this. It's great. You know, that's part of the thing. So no, please, I think that would be terrible to make everyone's course wherever you go in the world exactly the same. As part of the adventure. You know, like I say, maybe let people know, or you know, people who need the help, let them know maybe a week before the course or a week before everyone else, so we can get out there and counter strokes or whatever. But yeah, I think standardizing it would just, I think it's a shame. I used to do athletics. I did that for several years and it was boring. You know, running around, you know, doing 1500, 3000 meters, whatever, running around the same track, loop-de-loop. It's boring. Yeah, you want something. So no, please don't standardize the course.
Ah, that's interesting to hear. I'm also really interested to hear a little bit more about Extreme Dreams, and kind of what your plans are with the organization and why you set that up.
So Extreme Dreams is my website, or I think these days it's a blog. But it started off in 2002. I launched it back then. And the reason for it was when I first started getting into extreme sports, I would normally, the way back then was you'd phone the company up. So I'd phone up, say, a paragliding company and say, hi, I'd like to come along and do some paragliding. And they'd say, yeah, no problem at all. And I say, oh, by the way, I'm registered blind. There'd be a pause and then say, oh, sorry, you can't come. And it was always one of two excuses. It was either their insurance wouldn't cover me or it was against their company's health and safety rules. So this would go on, and normally it'd take 10 phone calls, and it'd be number 10 where someone would say, yeah, come along, I'm sure we can do something with you. So 9 times out of 10, I'd get a no. So this went on for 2 or 3 years. And by about 2001, 2002, I thought, you know, there's not many companies saying yes, but those who are saying yes, these people are thinking outside the envelope. They need some recognition. I want to sing their praise. I want to say, you know, I did this sport and I did it with these guys because these guys were good. These will help you. You know, if you have a disability or you have some, these are the people. This is the company you want to go with. I wanted to help promote them. So I then came up with the idea of Extreme Dreams, my website, extremedreams.co.uk. So I created that. And that's what it was initially, was just to say to people, if you want to try sport, and I've done it, this is the company I did it with, and these are the people with open minds who, you know, other companies might say no, but these are likely to say yes. Please go and see these people. I highly recommend them. And that's kind of how the website started. And then it's grown from there. And in the early days, I used to get a lot of contact from TV shows and different people wanting to know advice about extreme sports and where to go to do them, who were the extreme sports athletes, because I made contact with a lot of these people, you know, the specialists in their sport. So much so that in 2005, I think it was, there was a TV program, I don't know if you saw it, called Extreme Dreams with Ben Fogle. And when I started doing my public speaking in 2012, people used to say to me, I'd say, I've got my company's Extreme Dreams. And they say, oh, you got that, you stole that from Ben Fogle, blah, blah. But what I'd then have to say to them was, no, the company that made that program, Ricochet, contacted me in 2003, and I helped them for about a year and a half with advice on that. They then launched a TV program, which just happened to be the same name as my company. So I started off there with Extreme Dreams, but it went off there. But that's kind of how things have grown. I've been doing extreme sports all over the world, doing all sorts of daft things, and then writing up a wee report afterwards, like I say, promoting the company, saying, you know, go and do it with these. And that's basically what the website was about. And through that, I've been very lucky that after about 10, 12 years of doing that, I would start to approach companies and I'd get the 9 out of 10 no's. And I'd then start to say to those who say no, by the way, and I know you're going to say no because I'm blind, but before you say that, here's my website, have a look at that. These are the sort of things I am doing. I am capable. Yes, I'm blind, but the rest of me works. You know, I'm not unfit. I'm not, you know, sitting watching telly all day eating crisps. I am actually generally a fit person and capable of a lot of things. And that's kind of what's happened over the years, is it's helped, I think, with other companies that now started to know about the website. They've looked at that and they've started to realize that, hang on, just because someone has a disability, it doesn't mean that everything else doesn't work. Their ears might not work, their eyes might not work, they might have a limp, they might be in a wheelchair, they might be whatever. There may be ways about doing this, and more companies are now starting to grab that. And I've got friends who work in the outdoor world, the outdoor companies and stuff, and they're saying, yeah, people are much more open to the idea of, okay, they've got a disability. Let's see what we can do about it. You know, in the old days, it was 1 out of 10 companies said, let's see what we can do. Now it's probably more like 8 companies out of 10 are saying, okay, let's see what we can do about it. And that's kind of what Extreme Dreams has always been about, is just following my adventures and promoting the companies that I've been able to do it with, and telling people, if I can do it, why can't you? You know, and that's kind of how it's grown. And in 2008 or so, I started doing my own adventures, and that's kind of gone from there. And I've started getting sponsorships from companies like Pam. They've come on board and they've helped me out with kit and stuff. Red Paddle, when I was doing stand-up paddleboarding, John Hibbert, I mean, he was a total angel, total star behind all the stuff I did. He helped me with boards, either giving me prototype boards or cheaper boards, you know, giving me discounts on them and stuff. And I think that's probably what Extreme Dreams has helped me get, is support from different companies and different people to go out and do it. You know, so it's yeah, it's kind of really helped me.
Wow. Well, and again, it sets a precedent, right, for like providing amazing opportunities for everyone, because I think we all deserve it, and we all deserve to live a life full of extreme dreams. So keep up the great work, Dean. We're very proud of you. I think it's honestly, it's quite remarkable to look at it. And I'm not even joking. Like when Holly and I were doing our research, I was like, wow, this guy is cool. And what he does is cool. So
I'm not sure I'm cool. I don't have ever been called that. Maybe I'm crazy, yes, but I'm not sure about cool.
It's pretty incredible to have all your adventures documented in one place, and you know, I enjoyed reading some of the blog posts that you've written, and I think it's a great place to just keep a bit of an adventure diary as well. Yeah, no, it's been really incredible reading and hearing all about your adventures and how you navigate, quite literally those challenges, without, you know, full range of sight. And I'm sure your friends and family, and of course Molly, your guide dog as well, all really are happy to help out too. So thank you so much for sharing everything. If anyone wants to reach out to you and they have any questions, maybe they're also a paddler, or they're somebody who also struggles with sight loss, or if it's just someone who wants to reach out and say hello, where's the best place for them to find you? Is it through Extreme Dreams, your website?
Yeah, I mean, we have a contact form there that you can certainly send an email that way, or you can get hold of me on Facebook. I've got Dean Dunbar, and then I've got Dean Dunbar Blind and Dangerous on there. So you can reach, you know, send me what's it, DM, PM, whatever they call it these days, but you can message me there. So yeah, feel free, please. You know, yep, no problem at all.
Awesome. Maybe we should title this episode Dean Dunbar Blind and Dangerous. I quite like that tagline.
absolutely, there's no question.
Blind, dangerous, and a super cool paddler.
That's part's true. I'm not sure about the latter. I'm just about sharing the course.
No, thank you so much for sharing your story. We've really enjoyed hearing all about it. Before we finish off, is there anything else you'd like to share, or anyone you'd like to thank, or any other stories you have to tell us?
I mean, I have lots of stories, and I don't think you have the time for that. But I would like to say thank you to all. I mean, obviously to Rona. I mean, she's my number one guide, you know, supporter. She's amazing. But I've got lots of people who have helped me over the years, and they're still helping me now. I'm just so grateful to all these people that come out in the water with me and help me. And like I say, a lot of the things I do would not be possible without them. I'm not going to start naming them now because I'll probably forget someone. And again, the list would be, you know, it's huge. But you know who you are out there, and you know what you mean to me. And I'm totally very blessed to have these people in my life. So I'm yeah, very grateful to them all. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. No, well, thank you for sharing, and I'm sure they enjoy helping you too. So yeah, we've had a great chat today. I've learned so much and really enjoyed hearing all of your stories. And we hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you. Andrew, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in and for listening to this episode of the Rise and Glide podcast, brought to you by Paddlelogger.
We just have 2 small things to ask you before you close this episode. The first one, if you enjoyed it, please leave us a rating and a review. It really makes a big difference. And the second one is to go to the App Store and download Paddlelogger today.
We can't wait to see you on the next episode.